Hello, welcome. I see that folks are jumping on. We're so happy that you're joining us. And uh, I'm Abby Youngblood. I know some of you. We are going to give just like a minute or so as folks are jumping on before we kick off the event. So I just want to welcome everybody as folks get situated. Um, we'll get started in just one moment. It's great to see so many folks from a lot of different parts of the US joining us for this virtual event. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here. This event is called Growing Market Pathways, Connecting Farmers and Handlers to Organic Opportunity. I'm Abby Youngblood. I'm with the National Organic Coalition. I'm joining from Arlington, Massachusetts, which is just outside of Boston. And I'm going to help facilitate the conversation today. And I wanted to share that the National Organic Coalition, or NOC, is a national advocacy organization that has been working to protect the integrity of the organic seal and increase support for organic agriculture for more than 2 decades. And many of you are already engaged in our coalition work. So welcome, good to see you here. And if you haven't yet gotten involved in the National Organic Coalition, we hope that you will become more engaged. We are convening this event with support from the USDA Transition to Organic Partnership Program, the TOPP program, and many of you are part of that initiative. Welcome. We're really happy that you're here. But for those of you who are not familiar, TOPP is a nationwide initiative to support transitioning and organic producers with mentorship and with other resources as well. And today's event is really going to showcase some of those other resources that have been developed through the Organic Trade Association, Rodale Institute, and the Organic Agronomy Training Service, resources that really are aimed at helping connect farmers and processors with market opportunities. This is a 2-hour event. And Libby from the Organic Trade Association is going to help kick this off by sharing a big picture analysis of the organic marketplace and help us understand a little bit about what we know about imports and what that might mean in terms of opportunities to grow domestic production. And then we have Joe Dixon with us from Wolf and Associates, and he will be sharing a new toolkit that they have been developing together with Rodale Institute to equip growers, policymakers, and regional partners with actionable market intelligence. That toolkit is still in development, still evolving, and Joe is going to talk a little bit about some of the ways that you can give input into that process as they um, continue to develop the toolkit. We're also going to be hearing from my colleague Bridget at Rodale Institute about a series of events that they've convened over many months. And I'm really excited to hear from Bridget about how they have shared market information with organic producers and how they're helping connect producers with buyers and the insights that they've gained from those events that have taken place, and also a look ahead at future plans. And then finally today, during this event, Mallory from Oats, the Organic Agronomy Training Service, is going to talk about what they've learned from a needs assessment that they have done with handlers. We know that processors are often a missing link in growing organic supply chains, so the work that Oats is leading is really critical to growing organic markets by supporting handlers in getting into organic. I want to let you know that throughout the event, we welcome questions. Please use the chat box to engage at any point with questions, with comments, and we're going to be keeping tabs on those, and we'll keep a queue of questions that you're asking and then have our presenters address those as we're able. And we also have a couple polls that we're going to be doing during the event so we can get a little bit of input from you as well. And on that note, before we get started, we want to do a quick poll right now to learn who is in the room. And so we've just put up the poll, and we want you to select any of these answers that apply for you. You can pick multiple choices here. We're going to leave this up for just a moment as we get a sense of who is here with us today. And while folks are responding to the poll, we also want to let you know about the resource page for today's event. And we're going to put a link in the chat box right now so you can access a lot of different information that our presenters are going to be covering throughout today's event. And we're also recording this event, and we're going to make that recording available. You may have some colleagues who are not able to be here who would want to see that recording later. All right, so if you haven't entered your input into the poll, do that now. We're just about to close that up, and then we'll look together at who's here. All right, so we have some results, and I think we're sharing those results. Hopefully everybody can see that we have a lot of folks here. About half of you are partners in the Transition to Organic Partnership Program. So it's great to see a lot of top folks here today. A really good chunk of you work on organic research, education, and advocacy. We also have some farmers. It looks like 18 farmers and ranchers in the room, and also just a lot of people who work directly with farmers and ranchers. Not as many folks who work in organic processing or handling, but we do have some folks who either are organic processors, handlers, or who work with them. So it's a great and very diverse group, and we're so glad to have everybody here. So to kick things off, I do want to go ahead and introduce Libby, our colleague from the Organic Trade Association. Libby is the Director of Programs at the OTA, and she's a really fantastic leader for our movement. And Libby, we are so happy that you're here to bring kind of a big picture perspective about what we know about the organic marketplace, some trends that we're seeing, and also some untapped opportunities that we may have to grow domestic production. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Libby.
Great. Thanks so much, Abby. Thank you for creating and facilitating a space for the discussion today, and for the opportunity to share a bit about OTA's research and analysis on the organic market. As the top national partner with the National Organic Program on Markets activities, aiming to grow organic markets domestically and to support all of the incredible work happening throughout the top regions, I'm really excited that you're going to hear more about that great work from each of our partners. I think it's so important to elevate the national top programs to our regional partners and to identify how regional partners can be supported through our work to grow the market, whether that's in developing educational resources, hosting technical assistance on the market, events for buyers and suppliers to connect, or transition training resources specifically for handlers and processors. There's a lot of really fantastic work happening. My job today, as Abby just said, is to set the stage about the market opportunities, and I'm excited to dig in. But before I do that, I will quickly share with those of you who maybe are less familiar about what OTA does, that OTA is the leading voice of the $71+ billion organic industry in the US, and we represent organic businesses and producers across the US, which includes those who grow, ship, process, certify, distribute, import, and export, consult on organic products, whether they're brands and retailers. From the farm to the market, we promote and protect organic with a unifying voice. With a membership that is across the supply chain that serves as the leading voice for our growing organic market, we're really well positioned to analyze the market trends and growth opportunities. And one way that we do that is through conducting a yearly survey and producing our market report. These data points are quoted throughout the year, and we really take our work in this role of understanding the marketplace seriously. So I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to share this with you today about what we learned in 2024. Here on this list, you'll see the 5 identified key takeaways that we learned in 2024. So I'll walk through each of these briefly. Number 1, and this is really a pivotal piece here, organic sales doubled the rate of growth of the total market in 2024, even when we look at this adjusted for inflation. 2 of all of the seals, organic is the most trusted, and younger generations like millennials and Gen Z are increasing their demand for organic products for their homes and families. 3, We need investments and reforms to ensure organic products are available, and we need efficient standards to ensure continuous improvement and growth of the organic market. 4, efforts to ensure that organic standards meet consumer and customer health and sustainability priorities would yield increasing value on the organic brand to consumers. And finally, 5, as the organic marketplace grows, value and costs need to be shared across the full supply chain to ensure longevity and growth from the farm through to the market. Despite supply chain challenges, uncertain macroeconomic conditions, and challenges facing farmers in 2024, the organic market grew to a $71.6 billion industry, impacted by trends, by the younger generations having an impact on the overall market. Organic had its strongest year since the pandemic last year. The total market, however, had its slowest since 2017. For the first time since 2020, organic sales growth is higher than the total store sales in 2024. If you go to the next slide, more than double the rate of growth over the entire store, as you'll see on this chart. The data is telling a story for us that shoppers found that the gap between organic and conventional prices was narrow enough that their willingness to pay for organic increased last year. Next slide. This year, OTA and our partners introduced some further studies to look at the impact of inflation on the overall market. So when you look at these two charts, the top chart shows organic growth, and the bottom is looking at the total marketplace. On each, you'll see a blue line, and that is showing the total growth in sales. And we're comparing it to the orange line on each chart, which is showing the adjusted for inflation growth. What you can see here is that when we adjust for the data from the last slide for inflation, organic sales have grown 3 years since 2021, where the total market sales reflect 2 years of decline. So I'll take a step back and say that in a different way. I will stay on the other slide for one quick second. In other words, the growth that we saw on that last chart of 2.5% total sales for the total market, when adjusted for inflation, is actually a 0.3% decline for total store growth. Organic, however, had 2.2% growth in the market when adjusted for inflation. The point, the growth is real in organic. While inflationary factors are propping up the total store sales, organic is on the road to recovery since 2020 with 3 years of stabilizing growth. Next slide. When we look under the hood, we can see that nearly every product category saw growth in 2024, both in pricing and in volume. I'll dig in on a couple of specific areas, but for time, if you have questions, you can ask about some more specifics later as well. Number one, what I'll point out is that meat, poultry, and seafood by far grew the most, up to $2.4 million almost, and it saw more than 16% growth from 2023. Keep this in mind as I move a little bit into some of the import conversations as well. Secondly, dairy and eggs, beverages, all in produce, all saw over 5% growth. And then a couple other areas, snacks, candy, textiles, supplements, health and beauty, pet, and grocery saw between 4 and 5% growth. Of the top 15 US organic food subcategories, the largest was berries, and it was followed closely by milk and cream. And notably, I will also share that berries saw more than 10% growth in sales for 2023. Okay, next slide. The report also forecasted growth through the end of the decade. On these charts, what we see here is that for both organic food and organic products outside of food, think textiles, health, pet, beauty, and personal care, both are expected to show continued growth into 2030. Overall, organic is forecasted to grow with a compounded annual growth rate of 5.1%. When OTA surveyed businesses about the constraints that they face for growth, on the next slide, you'll see over 80% did not identify consumer demand as a limitation. There were a few key trends in the survey of businesses that we did learn about. 40% identified either infrastructure, investment, or availability were limitations to expansion. This includes things like access to ingredients, processing and handling capacity of organic products within the US, or land access and readiness. Moving into the next slide and looking a bit at imports and exports. When we look at them, the first thing to keep top of mind for all of us is that we import more food than we export by volume. Generally, we follow trends of the total market, but there are a few areas where the organic market does not import or export in alignment with the conventional marketplace. When we look at 2024, our key import partners are unsurprisingly topped by our North American trade partners of Mexico and Canada. We saw 44% of the imports that were tracked from Mexico and Canada, and we tracked exports of over 67% to those two countries. One interesting trend we're also seeing in the export side is the growth of the Middle East market. Generally, exports were up 18% in volume over 2023. Certainly, though, we are well aware that the import and export world is a bit uncertain right now, but we still believe that there are opportunities for expansion into export markets, but for diversifying businesses generally. OTA has been producing the Organic Market Report. It was previously known as the Organic Industry Survey since 1998. The data for that report initially was self-reported from industry partners and members. Since then, our strategies have really evolved. Now, in this report, we're using major syndicate data like the Nielsen IQ and SPINS to analyze market trends. We're also running a survey yearly, and we're also looking at things like public company, financial filings, industry expert interviews, and we're consulting multiple USDA data sources. When you add to the changes in the data sources, the known reality for us to all understand the import trends and market opportunities is that our data integrity is not ideal to have a full handle on the state of the organic market today. A couple of examples to kind of point to that: HS codes have expanded data that we capture, but because certain HS codes wouldn't have existed a few years prior, comparing year-over-year trends can't be done. A one-to-one comparison requires nuance that is not feasible in a one-to-one comparison. Some high-volume imported organic goods do not have HS codes, so we need to make extrapolations as well. Add then to that the SOE implementation, which has added noise to the data, given implementation of import certificates later in the year in 2024, but not seen prior, and so we have no data to pull from. We think that import data will improve with the use of import certificates, but it's really critical right now to not look to one-to-one comparisons for data between import and domestic supply. We know that understanding the organic market opportunity is really pivotal for farmers and for brands, and that we need better data to inform our decision-making. There are policy opportunities that we've identified to improve market opportunities, whether that's infrastructure like processing plants for organic beef, or improving data integrity through legislation like the Organic Dairy Data Collection Act. Next slide. I'll dig briefly into a few of the markets also where we think we have some answers and also some more questions for our industry to be able to answer. As we think about production versus imports for organic products, if you look at where there are discrepancies between conventional and organic, you will see that beef, corn, and soybeans all are net import positive. So there's more brought in that what conventional is and less that's sent out. For grains, for example, we export soy and corn conventionally worldwide. If organic were to match the trends of conventional, we'd be exporting around 50% of organic crops. However, we import about 20% of corn and about 80% of soybeans, not 50%. So what are the roadblocks? Well, we think there are a few components, and I've mentioned them all already today. Infrastructure, accurate data for farmers to make accurate assessments about market opportunities domestically. Can a farmer make a rational decision to enter the market with the current infrastructure for beef and lack of processing capacity? No. External market forces aren't enough to piece the supply together for beef, and OTA and our coalition and policy partners strategizing about what policy interventions moving forward can impact the domestic supply production and lower the need of imports. This again goes back to data integrity for the organic marketplace. The lack of comprehensive and integrous data makes understanding opportunities a challenge. Okay, so we're going to go back to the last slide with the key takeaways, and I'll make a few final comments here. To wrap, as we go back on those key takeaways, we need to better understand and collect data, and we need improved policy implementations, such as the Organic Dairy Data Collection Act as examples of strategies within industry to better understand the market both regionally and nationally. Between data and policy interventions, collaborating more on research as an industry, and improving resources for farmers, processors, and handlers, such as the TOPP work that we'll be talking about today, that you'll hear from Joe, Bridget, and Mallory on. The more we understand the organic market, domestic and import, the more we're able to help the supply chain to make informed decisions. We have tools and technology at our fingertips as a society, and it's an aim amongst coalition partners and stakeholders to work on expanding the use and the leveraging of those tools and technologies to improve upon data and resources and have better understanding into the supply and demand of the organic marketplace to better impact pricing and to lower barriers for entry into the organic marketplace. I imagine there are probably some questions from what I've discussed, and this is only a surface scratching of all of the data in our report. But since I'm at time, I'll encourage you to ask some questions here. I am not the data expert at OTA. I'll do my best to answer questions in the Q&A, but otherwise we'll be happy to point you back to more answers later. Thanks so much for the opportunity to share a little bit more about the market. I'll hand things back over.
Thank you, Libby. That was a great overview. And as I mentioned in the chat box, we've put the link to the resource page so you can access these slides. It's a lot of information to take in. We are going to give Joe a chance to present first, but if you have questions that you want to ask Libby, please put them in the chat box. And we will have some time for questions for both Joe and Libby when Joe gets to the end of his presentation. So feel free to put your questions and comments there. And thank you so much, Libby. That was really great. I want to introduce Joe Dixon. Joe, we are thrilled that you can be here. We really appreciate the work that you and your colleagues at Wolf and Associates and Rodale Institute are doing. You're focused on developing a toolkit with some region-specific information about organic market opportunities. This is a much-needed resource. And for those of you who don't know Joe yet, Joe is an experienced consultant. He has a wealth of experience over 20 years, focused on building trust between consumers and brands, and has worked extensively on standards development. Former NOSB member, he's worked on certification programs, including organic certification. So thank you for being here, and I will turn it over to you now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Abby. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And thank you, Libby. That data you presented is really compelling and a really nice setup for what I'm going to talk about, which relates to taking that data and those trend lines and trying to make them actionable and useful for farmers and regional food policy players in building organic agriculture within their region. Thank you for the intro, Abby. You covered my bio. I would only add that in addition to my work with Wolf and Associates, I am currently the board president and interim executive director at Pennsylvania Certified Organic. So I wear a different top hat there. Not a top hat, but a top hat. I also am a top mentor. I've been over the last 2 years helped almost 10 food hubs and nonprofit food distributors in the Northeast US become certified as required by the SOE regulation. And so that's been really helpful for me to be in the trenches, driving around rural New England and meeting with farmers and distributors and looking at the supply chain from a lot of different angles. So I'm here today to share an early look at a tool that we're developing with the Rodale Institute called a Farmer's Toolkit. It's designed to connect the dots between market demand, production opportunity, import and export data, and help growers who are transitioning to organic, thinking about transitioning to organic, or are currently certified and thinking about different crops and sales channels. The goal is to help this macro data kind of get granular in a way that helps those farmers think about crop selection, infrastructural challenges, opportunities in their regions, etc. Sorry, I'm having trouble advancing my own slides here. There we go. Awesome. So this cool toolkit is being developed to really reframe how we think about market development as part of the TOPP program and our work out in the regions. Rather than pushing supply, we want to understand demand first. Where, when we talk with retail buyers, with distributors, with people in different sales channels, where did they see the big opportunities? And as we look at this wonderful data from OTA, some of the source data that they've used from USDA, from ERS, and other agencies, how can we unpack that in a way that helps those farmers really understand where the demand is and where it is likely to go as they think about sales channels, crop selection, and other dimensions of farming? We are building this toolkit, for a number of reasons. Most importantly, to equip growers primarily, and secondarily, regional policymakers, regional partners, state governments, people thinking about infrastructure challenges and market development with actionable intelligence. Very importantly, one of our biggest goals is to just identify high potential organic crops by region based on growing seasons, climate, import and export conditions. We want to support investment, transition, and growth strategies in each region and strengthen regional resilient organic supply chains to meet rising consumer demand. And really, with a secondary focus on onshoring some of the import gaps that we learned about earlier. What we're aiming to unlock is increased regional production of high demand organic crops, of course, reduced dependent on imports, increased economic opportunities for US farmers, resilient supply chains, and stronger connections throughout the supply chain. So, what's in the toolkit? We start with the big picture. There's a national module that I'll show you guys as a preview in a minute that covers the big picture. A lot of what Libby just showed us, the US market size, growth rates, leading categories. Importantly, we get into not just, the domestic market, like what do we sell at retail and how do those categories break down, but also what do we grow? What is the gap between what we're producing domestically and what we're consuming domestically? And how does a narrative emerge there around where the opportunities are? And then we pin on to that model a regional module, starting with well, actually, I'll show you Southeast today. I've also built one out for the Northeast US. And over the next few weeks, we're building them out for each of the top regions. For some regions, like the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic and the Southwest, we're breaking them up a little bit to accommodate, different growing climates and geographic conditions. And we built this using much of the same data that OTA used and the data they pulled together. We also looked at a lot of, Rodale's historic state of the organic industry reports. We are looking at a lot of USDA and ERS data. Most importantly, we're also spending a lot of time over the next few months meeting with buyers, independent retailers, national conventional retailers, distributors of all scales around the country, and then also institutional buyers, schools and hospitals, and commercial buyers, big food processors, smaller regional processors, people buying organic ingredients for further processing to pull together both a national and a regional picture of demand with a little more of a anecdotal qualitative nuance from those conversations. We're seeing this as, more than a white paper, where we want this to be a true toolkit that can be used by the regional top leads, by others in the regions, by the Rodale Institute and their consultants around the country, anyone really interacting with transitioning farmers. We want this to be something that provides real data, but also sparks real conversations out there in the far-flung regions of the country as we support the continued growth of organic agriculture. Our timeline. So we're presenting this to you all here today in early July. We're asking you for your feedback, both in the Q&A period, if I leave enough time. If not, we're posting a link to a survey form that we've set up for you to provide your feedback, your questions, your contact info, and that all goes into a database that we will review and engage with folks on. In July and August, we are conducting our buyer interviews and developing the regional snapshots for each top region, which we'll send out to each regional lead by July 21st. I've scheduled 2 days in August. I wanted to leave plenty of time for each regional lead to review the toolkit, discuss it with other regional partners, and bring everyone together for a listening session for each region on the 27th and 28th. We'll take that feedback and integrate it into the toolkit. And our goal is to finalize the toolkit by fall, September, October, so that it's available to use well in advance of next spring. A couple of caveats. What I'm about to show you is under development. It's a proof of concept. It's a rough draft. There's real data in there. It's still being refined. We're going to have some grown-up professional designers have a whack at it. So, this is not the finished product. But I want to make it really clear that this is going to be layered with all of your feedback through multiple channels and much more discussion with both national and regional partners. So for starters, the national landscape. This has a lot in common, with what we just discussed with Libby. Um, we want to help farmers of all scales and geographies understand the broader context. Where are organic sales growing fastest? Which categories are on fire? Which are shrinking, et cetera, et cetera. As I discussed, the top regions will probably get further subdivided. A lot of data from the OTA around the overall top line growth of the organic market, what we're buying, that sort of consumer retail picture. And then also layered in, with what this really means. When we look at the fastest growing organic segments from that snapshot, what does it mean that meat, poultry, and seafood are growing the fastest in terms of the feed market that drives that, the import reality around that feed market? Where are the opportunities for domestic producers? And we go through that data category by category. We want to help everyone understand what's driving that growth. As always, organic is driven by consumers who want cleaner products or avoiding pesticide and herbicide residue and always looking towards simpler foods, particularly as the public discourse around ultra-processed foods and their health impact continues to evolve and grow. As Libby discussed, the price gap continues to shrink. Organic is becoming more affordable compared to non-organic products. Weight loss drugs, it's really interesting. We're just starting to see, really interesting consumer research there on people who are consuming fewer calories or focused more on the quality of those calories. And of course, the generational shifts, the millennial, Gen Z, and beyond buyers entering the market that are driving shifts in consumer preferences around food. But as I discussed, we're also layering what we eat with what we grow, because that is a big disconnect and a big opportunity for the organic market. We want to, focus on not just what happens at the store, but what happens in the field and help the growers understand domestic production at a national level. Based on that data, we really dig in on opportunities to onshore, looking at each of those categories and commodities and looking at what is the annual import value versus domestic production. And for each of those, where are the geographical onshoring opportunities to help continue to boost domestic production and rely less on imports? And then once we go through that national snapshot, we get into each region. This is the snapshot of the Southeast. Again, we owe such a great debt to OTA and all of the great work they've done pulling together state level snapshots of organic production. We started with that data and then drew on ERS and other sources to, sort of continue to layer on impactful narratives for farmers in a region. But so for this, we open up with a picture of the region. What does both consumer and production data look like in that region? A lot of really interesting tidbits that come up as we go region by region and look at what we know based on available data. By state, what does the organic acreage look like? What do organic sales look like? And what are the leading commodities? And what are the strategic crop categories for expansion? Based on what we know around import and export data, regional climates, the availability of protected agriculture and season extending tools, where do we see the big opportunities in a given region? We also look at regional onshoring opportunities, looking particularly at, the import export gap that we discussed nationally, but focused down at a granular level in each region. And then most importantly, too, where are the opportunity areas? Why does it matter? And are there barriers? For example, and this repeats across the country, commodity by commodity, there's a lot of barriers around infrastructure, processing, slaughter, things like that. And we want to really call those out to make sure, it's not within scope for us to solve all of those infrastructure problems, but we want to make sure we're being very transparent with transitioning farmers and regional policymakers about what some of the barriers may be, especially in crops that we identify as high opportunity in a given region. We also look at agronomic and cultural barriers, various types of weed pressure in given regions, the access to technical assistant is variable region by region. So we get into the barriers and sort of like where those potential solutions lie. Do they lie with individual farmers? Are they more systemic? But we want those to be part of the dialogue and on the table as we have these conversations with producers. And then for each region, and it's not a Pollyanna-ish thing, for all of them, I end with this sort of the future is very bright for organic. Here are these points of light and inspiration and optimism in the region. And here's the role that your region has to play in this very complex and inspiring picture of the national growth of organic agriculture. So that's the draft of the toolkit as we have it now. As I've discussed, it's going to grow quite a bit as we engage in dialogues with each region, as we get feedback from our national partners, and as our team spends a lot of the next few months really deep in data and engagement with retail, institutional, and distribution system buyers across the country. So expect this to be expanded, peppered with a lot of quotes, anecdotal insights, and possibly some video content as we travel the country virtually and talk to a lot of folks and gut check our assumptions here and really refine them over the next few weeks. That said, I think that's my last slide. So I actually somehow have 4 minutes left on my little time here. I don't know how I did that. But I'd love to open it up to questions either in the chat or, Abby as moderator, are we taking live questions or do we want to stick to the chat here?
We're going to stick to the chat, Joe, and we do have a couple questions that have come through already, and I'll tee those up. And if there are others who have questions, please type them in the chat and we'll try to get to as many as we can. And if we could pull Libby back in as well, I'm going to ask you guys to tag team answering the questions. Or if folks have a question that's specific to one of the presenters, we will go with that presenter. So the first question comes from Harriet Bihar, just noting that when she talks with family and friends, they can still be put off by the higher price of organic and not really know the value of organic, not have a full understanding of the benefits when they're eating something raw. They perceive a difference between something that's raw versus something that's cooked. And so Harriet's question is really around how do we do a better job promoting the many benefits of organic in an easier to understand fashion. And Joe, Libby, whoever wants to comment on that, feel free.
Well, hi, Harriet. I'm glad you're here, and it's great to see your name there in the chat. Um, what a hard question. I mean, it's a complicated question. I think it's one that we as a sector have been dealing with since our birth. And I think we've made a lot of inroads over the last few years. I'm sure Libby can speak to the latest in consumer research, but one of our big learnings over the last decade has been that, for conventional shoppers converting to organic, one of the biggest drivers is avoiding agricultural chemicals. That in my experience in my Whole Foods years and beyond, like that has always been the most resonant messaging for people who are new to organic is, what am I avoiding and how am I avoiding substances that may negatively impact my health? I think for a narrower band of consumers, unfortunately, but a growing band of consumers, the greater good messaging is as resonant as the personal benefit messaging. The sort of stories around, the impact on waterways and, soil and ecosystem health and all of those things. Those are, to me, very as compelling in terms of convincing someone that organic has more value. But I think for general consumer audiences, those trail a little bit. Libby, I don't know if you have anything you want to add there.
Not a ton. I'll really be frank that like I'm not necessarily the consumer data expert on all of this, but I think what I will say is that what we know is that when folks understand the benefits better, the willingness to pay is increasing as we're seeing. So I think it's about messaging. I think it's about continuing to build on the work from the organic market development grant activities as well. Like those strategies are critical endeavors, I think, for all of us to keep pushing out the benefits of organic collectively and trying to be as unified and not as divisive. I think in some of the storytelling that we have about the value of organic, big picture.
Thanks.
I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for addressing that. And we could spend a long time talking about that topic. I'm going to throw a couple other questions at you. The next question comes from Phyllis, and it has to do with hydroponics and concerns that folks have around hydroponic production and feeling like that is really hurting the integrity of organic to have that included. And Phyllis is just noting she works in marketing for a USDA certified produce farm that grows blueberries. And when people hear that there's a lot of hydroponic blueberries being produced, that they're concerned about negative environmental impacts, about nutritional issues. And so maybe this is more of a comment than a question, but it does get at this issue. And I'm wondering if either of you want to comment on it, or in particular in the context of how we grow domestic production while also maintaining the integrity of organic.
There are no softball questions here today. That's a good one though. It's a really important question, Phyllis. And I sit in southern Vermont, where there's incredible soil-based tomato and veggie production and hyper awareness around this issue of the allowance of hydroponics. Unfortunately, the organic sector does not have a unified perspective on the question. We have a lot of our growers in California who are very strongly committed to hydroponics as a way of getting, produce grown without pesticides to a bigger audience. And I think that difference in perspective is ongoing. It's something, the reality is that the practices are allowed currently by the National Organic Program. I think the NOSB and the NOP are the right channel to continue that dialogue. But it is a difficult one because they're really, as we work with both small berry growers here in New England and other larger producers in Southern California, there is not a unified position on this within the organic sector. But I appreciate the comment. As we build the toolkit, it's something we're acknowledging very deeply as we, recommend, sort of high tunnels and protected agriculture and ways of extending the season. We're being very careful to acknowledge that controlled environment agriculture and hydroponics, while allowed by the NOP, are very controversial and may not always resonate with a lot of consumer audiences.
Yeah, thank you for that, Joe. It's a hard issue. The National Organic Coalition has a long-standing position of opposition to the inclusion of hydroponic within USDA organic. It is a difficult issue, and one where, from our perspective, the USDA has not aligned with the will of the organic community. So I'm going to move to one other question. This question comes from Grace Jackson. She wants to know more about how Wolf and Associates identified buyers and other stakeholders that you're interviewing at the regional level as part of the work of developing the toolkit.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have a tentative list of who we want to talk to that's based on our desire to really balance geography and scale. In the retail sector, for example, we want a mix of independent retailers, either small regional chains or one-off independent retailers, natural channel retailers that are national, like Whole Foods and Sprouts and others, national conventional retailers like Safeway and Kroger, And then on the distribution side, like we're talking with regional organic focused distributors like Organically Grown Company and Veritable Vegetable. We're also talking with UNFI and some conventional distributors. We can't talk to everyone in the country within the scope of this project, but we wanted to create a sampling that really speaks to the diversity and scale and geography in both the retail, distribution, institutional, and commercial sectors. So if you have suggestions on folks in that supply chain that we should talk to, I'd recommend using the form. We're very open-minded and open to introductions here.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And I did put a link to that form in the chat box, and I appreciate the ways that you're trying to integrate feedback from a lot of different places to strengthen the toolkit. Um, I'm going to acknowledge some of the other questions that are in the chat and make some suggestions about how we can address them, knowing that we can't, we're going to keep moving, but I want to just point out that there is a question, and I am going to butcher your name. I'm really sorry. Gui Mwao has a question about, how have folks been working with small farmers in the transition to organic partnership program? And I know we have a lot of folks on this call who are part of the transition to organic partnership program and who have worked very specifically with small farmers. So if you are able to share a little bit more in the chat box about that, I think that would be really helpful. Um, we also have a question from Tim that has to do with mushroom production and the relationship between indoor growing, hydroponic, mushroom production. So I know we have a lot of experts on the call. So if folks want to try to address that in the chat. And also the question from Danielle, just asking about, Joe, whether or not the toolkit is going to be updated with time regarding import and export trade volumes, domestic sales. Like, is this something that is going to be able to be updated? So folks can continue the conversation in the chat, and I'm going to keep us moving forward a bit to our next segment. And thank you, Joe and Libby, for addressing what you can in the chat, and also to other folks on the call who maybe can address some of the additional questions. So let's see. We are going now to the second part of our workshop, learning about some of the market insights from Rodale Institute. And I want to introduce Bridget Gilmore, the Market Development Manager at Rodale Institute. I know Bridget joined Rodale in 2022. She lives in Boulder, Colorado, and has been working really closely with support from the Transition to Organic Partnership Program. She's been playing this leadership role in helping convene events across the US to provide producers with organic market information and to connect producers with buyers. So we're excited to hear more about the insights that have come out of that series of events. Before I turn it over to Bridget, we do want to do one additional poll. We want to learn a little bit more from all of you about some of the barriers that you see on the ground when you're trying to help connect organic operations to markets. And we're going to ask you to just identify the top 2 barriers that you see on the ground. And it may be that with this poll that's just popped up here, we don't list the thing that you are finding to be most challenging. So if what we are including in our poll is not the thing that you are actually seeing and experiencing on the ground, then please use the chat box. And I'm going to ask Bridget to kind of keep an eye on the chat box to see what kinds of additional comments or additional factors are in play when we think about the biggest barriers for producers getting connected and accessing market opportunities. And we will give just a moment more for folks to answer the poll before we look at those results. All right, let's go ahead and, oops, some last minute responses are flowing in, but let's go ahead and close up that poll. And I'm just seeing that the lack of processing and handling facilities, that's something we've already talked about a little bit, being in particular a challenge for livestock is one of the barriers that's coming up to the top, and the other one being just the premium that farmers get, the farm viability issues and those price signals that farmers are getting. Are they getting the price point they need? And that's a question I have on some of the opportunities to onshore domestic production. What's the return on investment if you transition to organic, and is that going to be a viable path? I know that you've encountered those already, Bridget, in the work that you've been doing. Is there anything else, Bridget, that came through the chat box that you would like to flag for us?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but I'm very interested if people want to continue to share those thoughts in the chat as I continue presenting.
Great. All right. Well, I will go ahead and turn it over to you now to tell us more about what you've been learning.
Great. Thank you so much, Abby and Alice and Joe and Libby for your presentations and for teeing up this work so well. So as Abby mentioned, I am a part of the team at Rodale Institute. And a lot of you are familiar with Rodale Institute, and we have a consulting team that's been around for a little bit over 5 years now. So we work across the country supporting farmers in their transition to organic. And I joined the team about 3 years ago to support with markets connections, so connecting farmers and buyers. And now we have a mighty team, the markets arm of our consulting team. We have 2 full-time people, 3 part-time people, and we're continuing to grow across the country. So our aim is really to work in parallel with the agronomy arm of our team, so supporting farmers in transition from a crop rotation and management and paperwork perspective, as well as markets access perspective. And we've really been able to grow and increase our impact thanks to the National Transition to Organic Partnership Program with OTA and led by Libby. And our work really is focused on events and educational resources. And I see a lot of faces in the room who have been involved with helping to bring these to life in the past year. So for those who are not familiar with this work, I just will highly overview what this looks like. So we have 2 in-person event types, which are buyer seller discovery events. Sorry, Alice, go back, please. Thank you. And this aims at facilitating connections between farmers and buyers in the form of tours or mini trade shows. Our market development workshops are in person as well, and they really aim to increase confidence for farmers to make informed decisions about their organic markets. And then we have virtual event types, so webinars and advisor calls, and these spaces are more accessible to a broader audience for those who have internet access throughout the country. And we really tried to highlight different subject matter experts on organic markets topics. And then the advisor calls are aimed at being more lower barrier to entry, more open discussion, not recorded, so people can allows for more of a free flow of conversation. And then we take key takeaways from and learnings from those market development workshops and virtual events and bring them together in educational materials. And all of these can be found on organictransition.org. I'll plug that a couple more times, even though I know a lot of you are really familiar with organictransition.org. So next slide, please. You saw some of these points highlighted in our poll. So you're familiar with these because we hosted listening sessions in last summer. We had a bit of a meeting marathon. The looks on our faces there are really of concentration and interest, not anything else, but meeting marathons to hear what you all had to say about what the key needs are for transitioning and organic farmers in your regions who you work with, and what are the key obstacles to organic markets access, or having organic markets access as a compelling factor for transition. So the top key themes start with the economic case for transition. So We were really motivated to make sure that we infuse all of our programming with this question of what is the return on investment for my organic transition as a farmer, and how do I better assess that in making this decision. And then the second we've touched on a couple of different times in this presentation, but the missing middle. So, and the opportunity, I've also heard this coined as termed as the remarkable middle. So the opportunity for certified organic processing facilities to allow more access, especially as it pertains to organic livestock processing and handling. This third point, we weren't able to touch on so much in the past year, but that's why we brought in Joe and Sylvia and the Wolf and Associates team to help better understand what demand looks like in relation to the bigger picture. How can we onshore opportunities, and how can we connect the dots, as Joe said, between consumer demand and opportunity for organic production in different regions. So really looking forward to working with you all more on developing that toolkit that Joe presented. The next theme that we heard time and time again was interest in more support around aggregation to open market opportunities for farmers. And finally, we heard this theme of the need for more trust building between farmers and buyers. And we took all of these themes, and this really informed our strategy for the events that we selected and partners we worked with in this past year, and the kind of content that we highlighted. So next slide would be great. Thank you, Alex. Okay, this is coming up a little bit blurry on my screen. Not sure if it's because I'm not wearing my glasses, but we'll make these accessible for all of you. You can see a map of where we hosted different events across the country in this past year and different attendance. So we really tried to show up in a lot of different spaces and focus on different commodity groups. You can see that we were able to work with the Meat Summit organizations, and that's where our livestock events kind of showed up time and time again here. And I'll just give a couple of seconds for you to be able to try to decipher some of this content of where and when we hosted these events. Okay, go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And here's an overview of our virtual events. So in this past year, we hosted a 3-part series. The first, it was really focused on farmer perspectives and how do farmers assess their return on investment for organic transition. The second was really buyer perspectives. So what makes for strong relationships between buyers and farmers, and really trying to get more inside the minds of organic buyers to help kind of demystify some of what's important on their end for organic markets access. And then the third part of each series was focused on bringing back those experts and having open discussion for any questions that people had. We found that format wasn't, we think in this upcoming year, instead of having that third open forum, we'll incorporate more Q&A into the webinars that show up first. But we hosted this 3-part series for vegetable, for livestock, for dairy, and for grain, all those different focuses. Go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So now I'll highlight one event in every region. We hosted 13 different events throughout the country, but our deliverables really focused on one of each event type in each region. So I'll just highlight one for the sake of time. But to kick off, we had this event in the Northwest, partnered with the High Plains Organic Growers Conference and the Flower Hill Institute. And this featured a buyers showcase. So we found it's really important to introduce buyers early on in events to start to help people to associate faces and names. And then we had a discussion focused on the organic meat marketplace and what future opportunity looks like. You'll see a comment highlighted by colleague Kavanaugh with Civic, and we were able to follow up after some funding was released for Civic to they're an organic processor and handler. It's focused on gluten-free and organic alternative grains. After some funding was released to be able to move forward with their facility, we were able to connect farmers directly to them. And so that's just some of the intended beneficial side effects of this work. We have these gatherings, but then what's really important is to have the space and time for follow-up. You can go to the next slide, please. This was our earliest event. So in the West Southwest, we had a market development workshop with CAF as part of their Organic Learning Day. And we were able to feature a panel that had focused on an organic distributor, a local organic farmer, a BIPOC-centered food hub, and farm to school programs. So these panels that are set up in the context of workshops are really aimed at featuring different perspectives within the organic marketplace. And we've learned that in different settings, so a lot of these events are happening as additions to existing conferences and programming. Sometimes the content needs to be more focused about what the organic market opportunity is and getting people more familiar with what that is in their region. And sometimes it can be a little bit deeper depending on the audience. If people are already often certified organic and looking to increase their existing markets access. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. In the Midwest, here's one event that happened in conjunction with the Land Connections Organic Grain Conference. And this was a buyer-seller mixer at a brewery. We were able to incorporate some corn from our very own Will Glacick's farm into some of the tortillas that were featured for the meal. So we love also being able to highlight local organic sourcing as much as possible in the food that's present at these events. And we learned that having this event at a brewery really drew in some, and then also was not a space that others wanted to be a part of. So it's important to show up in a lot of different spaces with these events. But I think the comment from Kelsey here with Clarkson Grain highlights that a lot of times people are putting faces to names, buyers and sellers that they were familiar with, but maybe haven't had the chance to meet in person with at these events. And then sometimes it's reconnection, and sometimes there are new connections. We can go to the next slide, please. Okay, we were able to partner with the Mid-Atlantic Grain Conference, the Common Grain Alliance in Virginia. And this event is really focused on regional grain chains in the Mid-Atlantic, and didn't necessarily have a strong certified organic focus, although a lot of people have organic practices or work with organic practices. So this was a panel discussion featuring different perspectives from the larger picture economic perspective with Argus Media towards to a local organic farmer, Scott Morgan, who works with Nova, New Jersey. And we can go to the next slide here. In the Plains, we had a panel discussion that opened up into small group breakouts, which was a format that allowed for a lot of voices to be heard. This was with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And we found some success in marketing through our channels, as well as leveraging the regional TOPP channels and drawing in buyers from outside of the region, like New Country Organics. We can go to the next slide. And this was our largest event at South. So the Southeast Organic Buyer Seller Mixer. Great job, Georgia Organics, for your outreach, and that is essential and something we really ask for collaboration with in the future as well, with all TOPP partners. This we had over 150 people here, and there was also an interactive portion where people had booklets to answer questions for different conversation starters to connect with buyers. And just I highlight that because there are a lot of different ways to put these on and engage different audience members depending on what makes sense for the audience. Okay. So to wrap up some of the key learnings that we pulled as themes, one-on-one outreach is critical to ensure that buyers show up to these events. So our team is really prioritizing a capacity for direct outreach and continuing to build our lists. And we welcome collaboration with outreach for buyers in your network. As Joe mentioned, and Grace, you called out, interest in these buyer lists. So the next is we encourage buyer and farmer introductions in all organic conferences. Early on in the conference is ideal to really connect faces and names and allow for more opportunities through connections throughout entire conferences. So no matter what the event type is, we're aiming to infuse that in the programming. We recognize that there are realistic and unpredictable trade dynamics, and we felt that we're keenly aware of that in this past year, and it's important to acknowledge that and also futile to focus on that in programming. So we're finding balance between realism about current state of markets and highlighting strong farmer and buyer relationships in the hosts for these events and the subject matter experts. And finally, we feel that these group learning environments are most impactful when they're paired with one-on-one technical assistance and follow-up. So to be able to have this space for buyers and farmers to meet or to go a little bit deeper about an organic market topic is best paired with follow-up from our team or other technical assistance providers in our TOPP network. And we can go to the next slide. So I just want to remind everyone why we are really enthusiastic about this work and its potential, and how farmers will benefit, who we're here to serve first and foremost. And then our last slide, I'll wrap up and leave a little bit of time for questions, I think, here, with how we can all continue to partner and engage. So we would love for you to promote our National Top Markets events and resources, which can be found on organictransition.org. And when you filter for the national, you'll be able to find these events and resources. We would love to contribute your perspectives or subject matter experts in your regions for our educational resources, as well as virtual programming. We'd love for you to attend workshops and buyer seller mixers. And we also always welcome feedback to make National Top Markets work continuously more effective moving forward. And if you have any of that feedback, please email markets@rodaleinstitute.org. And we're planning a full suite of events. We'll host more events than we did in this past year. And those have been moving along quickly. We're kind of starting with events that we weren't able to address last year and building out programming beyond as much as we can. So thank you again for the time, and I'll pause and see if anybody has additional questions. The chat has been going off.
The chat has been busy, and I really appreciate some really great comments that have come through in the chat. And I'm just going to flag a few things that are themes. And also, please feel free to, if you have a question that you want Bridget to address, please put it in the chat. But, we at the beginning did our poll and asked what are some of the barriers and helping producers access markets, and a new theme emerged in the chat conversation, and a really critically important one. I think it started with the comment Danielle made just about like sometimes buyers' volume requirements are like so much greater than what an operation can meet. And so a new or transitioning farmer or rancher can't meet that requirement, and that's makes it hard to access. And then I think that Steve Ela kind of added on to that, like consolidation within the grocery industry has meant that there are fewer local regional stores that are taking those smaller volumes. And so just this relationship between the challenge of especially farmers that are maybe producing at lower volumes being able to meet the needs of buyers, and just that greater theme around competition and consolidation. That's something that the National Organic Coalition is very interested in. I know Kenya also pointed out just some competition issues with imported beef products, and challenges around country of origin labeling, and how that might also influence, integrity and competition for U.S. farmers, and having consumers able to make those informed purchasing decisions. And Phyllis kind of added some comments just about in where she is in Pennsylvania, the fact that there are some smaller organic supermarkets like Kimberton and Mom's that are really focused on working with local producers, and how much of a difference, and made some other comments. So I think that was a real theme that came up, and I really appreciate folks putting those comments in the chat. There's also just a more specific question that came through the chat around recordings of some of these amazing virtual events that you've done. And thank you, Libby, for linking to where you can find those recordings. And that's also on our resource page if you're looking for some of the fact sheets that have come out, some of the recordings. Again, that organictransition.org, going to the national section, which is where some of this market work is focused on, kind of national level projects. That's where you can find some of those resources. There's also some great conversation in the chat around events that have happened, and partnerships with you, Bridget, with Rodale, to put on events, and some folks expressing interest in partnering in the future to plan some events. So that's really great to see those connections being made. Bridget, do you want to talk more about any of those issues?
Thanks, Abby. Yeah, I have a couple of disjointed thoughts, I guess. So I guess, Steve and Danielle, I'd love to follow up more with you about how we might be able to better incorporate the challenge of consolidation, how it impacts organic farmers in some of our programming moving forward. So if you're open to a brainstorming session, we'd love to reconnect with you there. And that touches on the theme of food hub and cooperative development to meet for aggregation to meet organic demand for minimums for buyers. So would love to talk more with you there. Thank you everybody who weighed in about previous events, and I took note of all the other comments, copied those, so we'll be diving into those a little bit more deeply. If you're interested in collaborating on an event in this upcoming year, please reach out to us. We'll be hosting them through September of 2026. And thank you so much to all the people who were in the room who we sub-partnered with, and yeah, we figured it out along with us. And thank you so much to Kate and Vivian and Will on our team, and the rest of our team who traveled across the country to put these on. So there are a lot of other thank yous I'm not incorporating there, but yeah, we're very grateful for the collaboration support and the chance to be able to visit different regions and get better understanding in regions where we don't live and work. So thanks again.
Yeah, the Transition to Organic Partnership Program is such a testament to how through collaboration we can just move farther, faster as an organic community. And I think we're seeing the fruit of those relationships that we've been building. So, and I think this hopefully is providing another chance to build even more connections today. I see, for example, Rachel Wood's comment about having one of the events at their upcoming conferences, and also just Laura Davis and Shirlene Rodriguez have been talking a little bit about some of the work that they've done in the Northeast around livestock processing. And they've done some really exciting work. I see that there are some connections being made there. And I'm going to mention it again at the end, but I'll say now we're having another event that some of you may have seen on July 23rd. So 2 weeks from today, we're having an event that is for top partners, talking about some of the success stories from across the country. And Laura and Charlene's work around poultry processing is one of the stories we're going to feature in our lightning round, but that event may be of interest to some of the folks who are here today as well. So if you haven't registered, you can do that, and we'll share the link again for that. I think I am going to keep us moving to our very last segment. And I really appreciate, Bridget, this was a great overview and very inspiring to think about how folks can work with you. I know many folks are already connected with you, but for those who are not, this is a chance to work collaboratively going forward to do more of these kind of events to serve producers who are looking for those market opportunities. So thank you for being here. And I know Bridget's going to stay on and Libby's going to stay on if there are other questions that folks want to ask. But we are going to, in our final segment, we are going to be hearing from Mallory Krieger with the Organic Agronomy Training Service, OATS. And we did ask Mallory to be part of the presentations because she's done deeper work assessing the needs of handlers. And she's been developing resources to serve handlers who are sometimes different in what they need compared to farmers. Although, of course, there's overlap. There are farmers who are also processors and handlers. But for those of you who don't know Mallory yet, Mallory is the National Program Director at OATS, and I saw on your online bio that in addition to your leadership there, you own and manage an 85-acre farm in Western Illinois. I didn't know that before today, so that's very cool as well. And thank you for being here. I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Abby. Hi, everybody. As Abby said, I am Mallory Krieger, the National Program Director with OATS. And for those of you who aren't familiar with OATS, we are the Organic Agronomy Training Service, and we are a fiscally sponsored program of the Organic Trade Association. And our mission is to help close the gap in technical assistance for farmers working in the organic space. So we work primarily with ag advisors, those who are serving in a consultant or advisory role for organic farmers to help those advisors improve their knowledge and competency in organic production methods. And in recent years, we have identified that to really truly fully serve organic farmers, in addition to more advisory support, they also need more market opportunities. And the Organic Trade Association approached us about creating educational resources for handlers and processors as part of their national TOPP project. And we were thrilled to come onto that project in the kind of curriculum writing role. And so to get a good understanding of what handlers and processors need, we conducted a needs assessment. And so I'm going to share the findings of that in the hopes that it helps all of you in your work to help increase market access for farmers. Apologies, my slides aren't advancing, but they are complying now. So our project is focused on small to medium-sized handlers. And that is because small to medium-sized handlers are a critical and often ignored factor in growing the organic industry. And our methods for working with them are to create, for us, given our limited resources and scope of this project, we are trying to create durable educational resources that can live long beyond the period of time that the TOPP projects are active and can serve as tools that small to medium-sized handlers and processors can use to help them navigate transition and the certification process. And we feel that it's so important to do this work with handlers and processors because they are a real choke point or a linchpin in organic acres coming online and in organic producers transitioning to producers transitioning to organic. They don't have a place to sell that can help them expand and scale their operations, then the economic viability and the long-term viability of organic producers is much more constrained. And so I saw in the chat during the other presentations conversation around particularly livestock processing, and that's a perfect emblem of the problem that we're trying to solve. There are not enough organic livestock slaughtering and processing facilities, which is a major constraint for producers who are wanting to sell organic livestock. And so handlers and processors are not just people who are selling to the end consumer, but they are also people who touch the product that farmers need. So they could be a mill that is doing custom milling for a farmer who's selling direct to consumers, or it could be a transportation company that is moving product on behalf of farmers. So it's not just about the major supply chain selling into large outlets. It's also in our local food sheds that handlers and processors are a linchpin to the growth of the organic industry. So our objectives for the TOPP project that we're working on with handlers and processors were one, to assess the training needs among handlers and processors. They are a new to us demographic. We've worked for years with producers and years with organic ag advisors. But handlers and processors have a very different set of constraints that they're working in and a different set of incentives and motivators. And so we needed to get a good understanding of what their pain points were and how they like to learn so that we can be effective in our approach to this project. We also did a landscape analysis of existing training materials for handlers and processors, seeing what resources, courses, organizations exist working in that space so that we can make sure that what we create doesn't unnecessarily duplicate, but is complementary to the existing materials. And from there, using the results of the needs assessment, our goal or objective rather was to design a 3-year education plan and then implement that education plan. We defined our target audience at the beginning of this project so that we could ensure that we are designing our educational products to serve a specific audience, that they can be tailored and curated for that audience, as compared to a more broad spectrum approach that may be less effective. So we refined our target audience and we defined it as handlers and processors who are certified or are considering seeking certification, and particularly inclusive of split operations, because in the handling and processing world, we learned that many handlers and processors, a high proportion that are certified organic, are also running split operations. And so we wanted to make sure that their particular and special needs were represented in our materials. We also limited our scale to small to medium-sized operations, though that comes more, it affects more how we disseminate and share the materials rather than what the content of the materials are, because regardless of scale, the organic regulations are the same. And then we also defined the sectors that we were looking at. Within handling and processing, it almost felt like there was an infinite variability of types of handlers and processors that we could work with. So we defined the sectors that we want to design materials for, so that way we can be more targeted and be more organized in our approach. And then finally, we also looked at what is the expertise level that we need to be training to. And we identified that we need to speak both to beginning organic and transitioning handlers and processors with those universal concepts of how to run an organic handling operation. But we also need to speak to the more advanced questions because they come quickly. People in handling and processing are not beginning for very long. The pace of business is fast and they get into the weeds pretty quickly. And so we identified that we need to get more advanced topics in the more category focused or sector focused materials. So we undertook once we had the target audience defined and we knew who we were needing to talk to, we undertook a needs assessment. And so we sent out a survey to all 8,500 handlers and processors that met our target audience qualifications that are listed in the Organic Integrity Database. And we also then sent out additional invitations to handlers and processors that were kind of identified by subject matter experts that we consulted with as being on the doorstep because they are not already in the organic integrity database. Of course, that's only certified operations. We wanted to also hear some feedback from processors who were not yet certified. Very difficult to create that list. So that list was pretty small. It was like 10 to 15 not certified, but on the doorstep handlers and processors that we included. We were very happy with our survey response. We received 248 responses, which was considerably more than we were bracing ourselves for. In past needs assessments, we found we would have pretty low survey response rates with a big blast to people who didn't already know who we were and were therefore more motivated to respond. So this response rate showed that there's an interest among handlers and processors for their educational needs to be addressed by the organic industry, just shown by the response rate that we received. The survey gave us some ideas of topics and modalities that handlers and processors need training on. But we wanted to have a more nuanced understanding of what the survey results were telling us. So we also conducted interviews with handlers and certifiers. We conducted 32 interviews in total. The majority of those interviews were with handlers and processors of all sizes and scales within our target audience range, as well as across all of the scopes that we are looking at, or not scopes, the sectors that we're looking at serving. And as we were talking with them, it became very clear to us that we needed to also include certifiers in our needs assessment, because the handlers were showing us in their interview responses that they look at the certifiers as their main education provider, their main point of contact, their entry point, and the source of nearly all of their information about organic certification for handlers and processors. And so we pivoted during our interview process, and we included certifiers in our interview pool to ask them from their perspective, what are the pain points that handlers and processors have with navigating certification? And where do they see the most need for education with respect to topics? And because they are seen by handlers as the main source of information, we realized that certifiers are going to be a very important linchpin in disseminating the products that we're creating, these resources that we're creating. And so we also realized we needed to make sure that the documents that we create, the resources that we create are in a form and format that fit with certifiers' workflow. So we needed to understand their workflow better. We were very pleased with the responses that we received in terms of the representation of scale and sector. They matched very well with known demographics of our target population. So we felt that we received representative information. So some of the key findings from our needs assessment, we learned that, so when our needs assessment was being conducted was right at the tail end of the rollout of compliance and enforcement with for strengthening organic enforcement, or SOE rule. And so we learned that SOE, that rollout, brought many handlers into certification who otherwise were not certified but were working with organic products, and they needed help. They were struggling. And it was also a stress test of the certifiers, because certifiers had to roll out compliance paperwork and processes for a very large, complex rule, and also train their staff, train their clients, and intake a surge of new handlers into the certification process. So it was a stress test of that system. And I think the certifiers rose to the occasion. But there were a lot of handlers who felt like overwhelmed, that they didn't necessarily have as much support as they would have liked. And that is where I think a project like this can be very useful. We learned that handlers are different than producers in their outlook and motivations for why they are working in organics. Having come from a long career of working with organic producers, being a producer myself, most of the people I work with, and even in the ag advisor category as well, are motivated by the philosophy of organic, by a stewardship ethic, an environmental ethic. And so a lot of times the conversations, that's an entry point to having conversations and starting training. Handlers and processors are motivated by the business case. It comes down to the money. They will transition to organic and include organic in their quality assurance and compliance departments if there's a market for it. If they have buyers who want organic, they will meet that market demand and they will go organic. And so they're looking more for nuts and bolts. How do I operationalize this? And less of a being convinced of the why of organic and the philosophy of organic, and even in certain respects, the consumer case for organic. They care about the numbers. We learned that there are very few sources of education information that the respondents use. When we did our landscape scan, we found a lot of material out there. It was out of date, especially with the rollout of SOE. A lot of things needed updating, but the materials were there. But the respondents to our survey and our interviews weren't using them. They didn't know where they were. They didn't know how to find them. They were moving fast, moving at the pace of business, and expected that their certifiers were going to hold their hand through the process. We also learned, and this one was not surprising, that everyone wants highly tailored content to their specific sector. And with a national project trying to meet the needs of every permutation of organic handler and processor, we had to think long and hard how we could honor that demand from the audience. As I said before, handlers really rely on certifiers as their point of contact and their handholder through the certification process, even though that is not the role of a certifier, and that is not, and certifiers meet that as much as they legally can. And so handlers see those certifiers as a conduit into the organic industry. So some additional findings. We learned that handlers who are already certified organic are running into challenges with the terminology and language that we use in organic certification. One quote that really demonstrated it was, "We get emails from our certifier that are like reading insurance policies." They feel like the language of compliance is inscrutable. How are they to parse what they're actually supposed to do on the ground? They can read the regulations, they can read the education sheets from the certifier, they can read the compliance document templates, but that is written necessarily in regulatory language. And it doesn't help them understand how they operationalize the regulations on their operation. So how do they ensure that they are meeting both their food safety requirements with the cleaners and cleansers that they use, but also meeting organic requirements? How do they ensure that they are keeping the correct records? They know that they have to have a traceability system, but how do they operationalize that? And a lot of the materials are very vague and are very lofty. So we heard loud and clear, speak plain language, speak layman's terms, be very direct in our description of how they can navigate certification. The other thing that we learned was that we need to motivate the why behind the regulations. For those of us who are deep in the weeds of policy and deep in the weeds of regulatory compliance, we know why each regulation is there. We know what it's trying to achieve, and we know how it could improve or protect organic integrity or meet the consumer expectation of what organic means. But not everyone who's new to organic can plainly see why certain regulations are in place and how they help improve organic integrity or help improve the regulatory system. And so we realized that we need to motivate the why, not only so that the handlers and processors are more likely to transition to organic, but also so that the quality assurance officers in the handling and processing businesses are able to better communicate to their coworkers, to their staff, to their production line staff, their transportation staff, why, when you are working with organic, you take extra time to make sure that the signage is correct, or that you take extra time to make sure that you're storing the organic inputs in a segregated place from the conventional inputs in a split operation. Or when you're loading a truck, it might be faster to grab that conventional pallet last and stick it on top of the organic pallet of open bulk bin watermelons. But if you do that and the truck hits a bump and you have watermelons fall out of the conventional bin, they fall into the organic and you have a contaminated and commingled product that can no longer be sold as organic. So motivating the why behind the best practices and the regulations is a really important finding that we had from the needs assessment. We also had some incidental findings. I call them incidental because they don't materially impact the decisions we're making with the development of our resources. But I think that they're useful for those of us who are working in education and advocacy to hear. So we learned that the SOE outreach did not penetrate deep enough into the supply chain, and that many handlers who are subject to SOE compliance still, even to this day, remain uncertified. This finding is, it's about a year old, maybe a little less than a year old. And so a lot can change in a year, but I'm still hearing from the handlers and processors that we're working with that there are handlers and processors that don't understand or don't believe that SOE applies to them. And so there is a great need for continued SOE outreach and continued SOE education so that handlers and processors who are subject to organic certification now hear that message and internalize it and go ahead and get certified. We also learned that handlers report a lack of consistency of quality and knowledge among organic inspectors, particularly with the handling scope. We all know that, many of us know that there is a shortage of organic inspectors out there, and I think that there is a training bottleneck, particularly with the handling and processing scope. And so many of the interviewees volunteered stories from their inspections where they felt like they were training their inspector while they were being inspected by them, and that the inspectors were asking questions that were inappropriate to their type of handling operation. One example that was given was among organic seed producers, and the inspectors requiring documentation that they used organic seed in their side-by-side trials to look at how organic varieties were comparing to conventional varieties. And that was one example of this tension. And then the final incidental finding was that handlers expressed frustration with the opacity and inefficiency of the review process. They are used to running fast. In a lot of handling and processing sectors, the pace of business is lightning speed. And so there is the certification calendar is historically more aligned to the annual agrarian calendar and less aligned to the rapid, continual, ever-changing calendar of handling and processing and consumer packaged goods. And so handlers felt that the process was opaque. They weren't sure how they could move faster. They felt that it was very cumbersome to add a new product. Now, that is not necessarily something that can be changed, but I think it is useful for there to be awareness of that perception that handlers have when we are all doing work and working with trying to bring more buyers and more handlers and processors into organic to help set expectations and to help them understand ways that they can work effectively with their certifiers to potentially increase that pace. I took that piece of feedback to a number of certifiers during the interviews that I did with them. And it was interesting to hear the counter argument that oftentimes from their experience, they respond in a reasonable period of time to a handler request to add a new product, provide a request for additional information that's required to be able to process that request. And they won't hear back for 2, 3, 4 weeks. And then they'll hear back and they want an answer right now. So I think there's truth to both sides of that relationship. And it's one where I think additional education and additional expectation setting can be helpful to bringing new handlers and processors into organic and retaining the ones that we have. So our needs assessment showed a list of topics that handlers and processors identified that they need training on. And so unsurprisingly, they wanted it all. They wanted training on and educational resources on every aspect of handling and processing. And so what we landed on with our approach to try to help handlers and processors have access to literally everything that they want and have it be perfectly tailored to the sector that they're in, that's an impossibility. But what we've decided to do is to utilize case studies very heavily so that we can show a full picture of the certification journey of a handler in each of the sectors that we're working in. And so for, say, livestock feed, we would feature a livestock feed handler and feature how they came to make the decision to come into organic, how they navigated setting up their compliance processes, their record keeping and traceability systems, their fraud prevention plans, and then how they are maintaining certification now. How do they run their business? What processes do they have in place? Showcase their SOPs and use that to show each of these topic areas as well as sector specific applications of those. Those case studies are going to be video case studies. So they're going to be a deep dive video interview showing how things are operating on that particular operation and be able to present that in a compelling way.
Mallory, I'm going to jump in because I want to give you a time check. We're at 1:42. I know you have some additional content and we have not a ton of questions, but I want to make sure we have a little bit of time and that you can get to everything you want. This is really great information as well, and I'm glad we're capturing it, but you may have to condense just a little bit if you want to get
Got it.
to the end.
Awesome, thank you. And so we also are looking at, so we also identified the types of formats of materials that the handlers and processors are requesting. So we learned that handlers are highly digital. They want to be able to access things from their phones. They want to have things be searchable and quickly referenceable. And so we identified that we need to create a searchable and browsable website with web-based articles that also includes quick reference guides, things like checklists and FAQs, and lots of visual aids. They want visual aids that help them navigate the certification process. And so we learned that videos are something that handlers and processors would like to have access to as well. So we have 3 video types that we're going to be putting together. We have case studies that I've already discussed. We also have scripted instructional videos that will guide the learner through detailed specific topics in a more kind of guided and curated way. And then we also have topical documentaries. And those are ones that are going to be excerpts of interviews that we do with individual handlers and then put them together as a documentary on a particular topic, like record keeping, showcasing a number of different record keeping systems that real world handlers use. After we conducted the needs assessment, we wrote our 3-year education plan based on the findings, identifying exactly what topics we are creating and exactly what modalities of delivery, whether a fact sheet or a video, each of the topics will be delivered in. We circulated that to a focus group of certifiers in partnership with ACA, the Accredited Certifiers Association. And so we had a focus group session with them. We presented the 3-year education plan, and then we asked them for feedback on the topics, concepts, pain points, formats, and how we can most effectively share the project to certifiers and to handlers through certifiers. And the goal with this focus group was to validate the findings of the needs assessment and our 3-year education plan. And thankfully, it did validate that. The key findings from the focus group aligned with the key findings from the needs assessment. It added some nuance and depth in certain areas from the certifier perspective. For example, the need to focus on co-packers and the unique role that co-packers play in the supply chain. And also really emphasizing the need for full and honest disclosure from handlers to their certifiers to really drive that message home. So those are some of the examples of nuances that came out of the focus group with certifiers. And also one of the things that came out of it was momentum among certifiers. It showed us ways that we can increase buy-in from certifiers to this project so that they are more likely to share the content out to their handler clients, and that this content will be of benefit to them in doing education activities with their handler clients. We did uncover one challenge through from the needs assessment, or I'm sorry, from the focus group, and that is but there is some variability in how certifiers use certain non-regulatory terminology and how they implement and operationalize some of the certification processes. And one of the challenges we have with this project is ensuring that our materials are universal and account for that variability. So we have published the first set of resources. Some of our resources are being published in the Organic Integrity Learning Center. In the microlearning section, there is a segment called A Newcomer's Guide to Organic Handler Certification. These 3 fact sheets are in there. We also have published them on the TOPP website, organictransition.org, in the resource section. If you go to the resources link for this meeting, I have linked to these 3 fact sheets. So our first 3 deliverables were fact sheets and a microlearning in the NOP Organic Integrity Learning Center. And we have many more resources that are currently in the development pipeline and are going to be published on a quarterly basis between now and the end of September of 2026. So be watching your emails. We are going to be sharing widely announcements as new deliverables come out. And we are partnered with the Organic Trade Association, who is taking on the marketing side of this project. They are building a dedicated web portal for these materials so that once everything is complete and published, we can promote to handlers and certifiers a one-stop location where they can go and they can grab educational content to deploy in their businesses. With that, I just want to invite all of you to email me or to chat me any feedback that you have, any topics that you think that we missed that weren't included in those slides, and any ideas or suggestions for how we can spread the word about these deliverables as they roll out and get them deeper into the handler and processor
Thank you,
population.
Mallory. And I love that you're creating a one-stop location that handlers can go to. And kind of on Mallory's point just now, we're going to post in the chat box an invitation to share your thoughts. What additional resources do you want to see included in this new handler education hub? I know for some of you, you took in what has been created already just now, like you just took that in. So we're also dropping Mallory's email in the chat box. Like if ideas come to you in the coming weeks, you can reach out directly and share those thoughts, or as you're looking over some of the materials that have already been created and are on the resource page. And if you, that sparks ideas. So feel free to put ideas now in the chat box. And feel free to also contact Mallory later. And I'm just gonna, I know you're probably looking, Mallory, at the chat box. I want to flag just a couple questions, comments that came through as you were talking. Kind of that same theme that came through when Bridget was talking, came through in the handler context with Steve Ela's comment. And Steve Ela is Knox NOSB specialist, but also an organic producer in Colorado. Just noting that for smaller handlers, UNFI is kind of the game in town. But it's really hard if you're small or medium sized to work with UNFI to distribute your products. So that consolidation is a huge factor for handlers as well. I also want to point out a comment that Charlene has made in the chat box. Charlene Rodriguez really, I think, resonated with this idea that folks are not yet aware of how SOE is impacting the need for handlers to get certified. And I think she wants to work closely with you, Mallory, to make sure she's reaching folks in Connecticut where she's working. Thank you for flagging, Charlene, that some of our links need to be fixed on the top resource page. We will attend to that, so those go to the right places. And I'll just also throw at you, Mallory, one question here that came through from Phyllis. And Phyllis has raised a lot of bigger picture questions that we can't fully address in the time we have left. But I wanted to ask you, has Oats, in the work you're doing to try to expand organic production, expand markets, are you finding that federal funding or other sources is constrained since the new administration has come in? Is that impacting the work that you're doing? And if so, how? I don't know if you want to comment on that, but that's one of the questions that Phyllis had asked in the chat box.
Well, we were fortunate that we did not have any of our projects completely eliminated during the funding review. There were some that some of our colleagues experienced were canceled, but we were not canceled. We have been constrained in the sense that NOP has shortened the timeline for the completion of this project from the end of Q1 2027 to the end of Q3 2026. So we've lost about 6 months of time to complete the project, but no funding reduction. We are anticipating higher competition for fewer funds going forward. So the work that we already had committed and funded hasn't been affected, but in a deep way. But we're seeing that RFPs for federal grants are either, sometimes delayed, not on their normal schedule, and that we are concerned that we may see funding reductions. I'm not on the policy side of things, and a lot of the programs that we're working with are one-offs like TOPP right now. So I'm not super plugged into things like the OREI grant or a lot of the NEFA grant programs. So I'm not the best to answer in a broader sense.
And I'll jump in with just a few. It's just a few. I think there's interest, even though it's a little bit on a different topic, but I'll just jump in that yes, there have been huge dramatic impacts on the organic community from things that have happened under this administration. And I can't name them all now, but I'll name a few. The OREI program, which is the flagship organic research program, is frozen right now, along with a lot of other research programs like the Specialty Crops Research Initiative, all the NEFA programs, those are frozen. And so that has a huge impact on research, and we're trying to get those unstuck. Some programs have been canceled, like the local food purchasing assistance program, which was really a critical way for a lot of small farms to sell organic products and have a market. And so that has had a huge impact. It's not organic specific. The other thing that's having a really huge impact is cuts at USDA. For those of you who followed the news, you saw that the Supreme Court has now said the federal government can move forward with the reorganization plans. So that could have a very dramatic impact on USDA programs and services. And there have already been a lot of cuts due to the reduction, the voluntary deferred resignation program. These are the kinds of macro issues that have a huge impact on the context for the work that we're doing. They haven't been the focus of today's conversation, but something that NOC is very engaged in. And if you want to be more engaged in those kinds of issues, you can subscribe to our newsletter and kind of follow those issues that way, and also follow them through other events that NOC puts on. So because we are close to the top of the hour, I want to say a very big thank you to Mallory for these insights. I'm so glad we recorded this session, because this is some really good in-depth analysis of the situation that handlers are facing and how we can help support them, and some very specific resources that all of us can use in our work with handlers or with farmers that want to integrate processing into their operation. So I'm really appreciative of that. I hope folks will follow up directly with Mallory and the other presenters that we've had today. I want to thank you for taking part in the event, for sticking with us to the end of our event. And we do want to ask everybody to take a moment to reflect. Just take a minute to think about, is there some action that you want to take in the coming months to help support the producers you work with, or to help better facilitate these market connections? And we would love it if you would be willing to share a reflection in the chat box on, like, is there an action item that you have as you're thinking about what you learned today and integrating some of the information that was shared um, in our session, and some of the resources and tools that maybe are new to you and that you have available now. What's one action that you want to take in the coming months to support producer market connections? So we're asking you to do that in the chat box. And while you're reflecting on and thinking about those action items, I do want to share just a few announcements. We've talked about our resource page a lot. We're going to send a follow-up email that links again to that resource page and to the evaluation survey. We'll make sure all of the links on the resource page are working. So we'll double check some of those. We do have the evaluation survey for today's event. We want to know what about this event was helpful and worked for you. Do you have any suggestions for improvement? We take that feedback seriously and appreciate it. So if you have a few minutes to fill out that quick survey, that would be great. Earlier this year, we convened an event that was focused on helping organic producers access conservation support through the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS. So I wanted to mention that we did that event, and we worked with some of our top colleagues at Oregon TILF to share that information. So if you missed that event, we encourage you to take a look at that if that's of interest to you, and we're going to share information about that in the chat box. We also have another event coming up on July 23rd. It's a TOPP partner only event called Assessing and Communicating TOPP's Impact. So if you're part of the Transition to Organic Partnership Program, it's a really great way for us to gather in a virtual space with partners from across the country and think about what we've achieved in these first few years of the program and what we want to continue going forward. We're going to hear this lightning round of presentations from some different partners around the country. So we hope that you will consider joining for that if you're part of the Transition to Organic Partnership Program. And then last but not least, we are hoping to be together in person this fall for a fall National Organic Standards Board meeting in Omaha, Nebraska. That is slated to take place November 4th through 6th in Omaha, Nebraska. We're still waiting to hear confirmation that it will take place in person, but if it does move forward as an in-person event, we will have a pre-NOSB meeting. That's a community-wide organic meeting. We'll be talking more about some of the issues that Phyllis was raising around Farm Bill advocacy, and how we work with the current administration. And we'll also be talking about hearing directly from farmers, for example, with a farmer panel. So that's an in-person event that we'll do in connection with the Omaha, Nebraska National Organic Standards Board meeting, and we will also convene a national TOPP meeting. We may have a chance then to see the final version of this toolkit that Joe was talking about today, and talk about a lot of other issues related to the Transition to Organic Partnership Program. We've tentatively slated that to take place in person, concurrent with the National Organic Standards Board meeting on Wednesday, November 5th. So that would be concurrent with day 2 of the NOSB meeting. So stay tuned for some more details as we know more about those fall events. As we're closing, I know we're kind of at the top of our hour. I wanted to ask Libby, is there anything that's popped out for you looking at folks' responses in the chat box? We asked you to just look at folks' action items. Anything that you want to flag for us that popped out for you?
Yeah, I didn't see anything directly, Abby, but I think what I would call out is in general in the conversation and the thread throughout the last 2 hours, there are a few specific call outs. One in general is getting to know about the national programs and ways that your organizations can share out resources and events that are happening in the future amongst your partners. There's a ton of really great resources that Rodale has developed, new resources as we've found trying to find them to download on the website for handlers as well. So I'd say check out the website, dig in, find where there are places that connect with the people that you work with directly. If they don't, be reaching out to all of us afterward and let us know where you have questions or where you'd like to plug in. And I think another piece in all of this just generally is just sharing out the Organic Transition website with partners, not only from the regional TOPP perspective, but also from national activities. I think there's so much opportunities on this market piece and trying to be really intentional and thoughtful about reiterating the opportunity and the activities. It's not the first time that people are probably going to click on something. It's the third or fourth time that it really starts to absorb. And I think I hear that in the themes and the thread of the conversation, that there's a lot of great resources, and let's make sure we can market the opportunity that we have in organic collectively.
Great. Thank you, Libby. That was a great kind of closing thought for us to end on. And I appreciate everyone who was here and all the partners who helped make this event possible. And we look forward to the continued collaboration. So thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Take care.